The Banyan Tree team is full of voracious readers, and we don't just read business books, we read articles, blogs, news pieces on topics which are as wide ranging as history, politics, philosophy, all sorts of sciences, and whatnot. And while finding the time to read can be a problem at times, a major issue is finding good, relevant articles with this increasing clutter on internet every day. And these are the problems that our sponsors for this episode aim to eliminate. Choose to Think, or CTQ, brings to you offerings that go by compounds, where each CTQ compound exposes you to some worldly knowledge and adds to your wisdoms from areas that you couldn't even imagine before in their own unique and interesting ways. For example, one CTQ compound is called the Daily Reader, and as the name suggests, it brings to you every day a 15-minute long, expertly curated article covering all topics from all domains of life, which will make you more future relevant, more confident, and just pure wise. With that, I would wish you all the very best with your up-leveling journey. Do check out CTQ Compounds, and we have posted the link in the description below. Thank you so much. Hi everyone, really elated to welcome you to yet another episode of the Banyan Tree, a video series where we interview some of the best Indian non-fiction authors and satisfy our curiosity, our thirst for knowledge to go beyond the book, have a dialogue with the authors. And before I go with the book and the author itself, if you have any author, any book that you would like us to read and interview, please do let us know in the comments. And today, the book that we have is something that I have been personally super excited about. And that is after reading it, or maybe while reading it. The book is Big Billion Startup, The Untold Flipkart Story by Mihir Dalal. And usually, Souradip introduces the speaker or the guest. However, what happened this time is that both of us read the books with very different approach. Sauradeep is very methodical. He looks up details in the books when he's reading, and I approach books from a very ledger perspective, just to get into the story, the narrative. And while reading this book, I didn't know who Mihir was. Mihir, no offense to that, but my assumption was that you would be an insider, someone who has lived the Flipkart journey, to talk about it, right? So I start reading the book without any homework, and it's, I guess, 25% of the book has passed, and I'm waiting that, okay, fine, sometime Mihir will come and then start talking from a first person perspective. And that just doesn't happen. And that's when I start looking at him and realize that no, he is not a Flipkart employee. He's someone who's coming in from the outside and then gives such a well structured and comprehensible narrative of the organization right from its inception to where it is today, that I was a fan then. And I mean, great compliments to you on achieving something like that. Beautifully written, and amazingly depicted the entire story. Um, I haven't been a very ideal employee so far, but the story itself was very motivating. It was very inspiring to take action, to just jump into work. Of course, had my own vision of starting making a startup and earning, if not a billion, at least $1 million. So.
Yeah.
So instead of us introducing you, Mihir, if you can give your own introduction, where you come from, what you do, and what led to this whole thing.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for the brief introduction. So basically, I've been a journalist, a business journalist, for about almost 13 years now. I Most recently I was with Mint. I worked there for almost 9 years, and I've been writing on startups and internet companies for the past 6 years or so. So the Flipkart book first was, I mean, I was actually first approached by a publisher in 2015. Um, uh, there was a lot of interest in startups at that time, because suddenly, from being almost thought of as like very non-serious businesses, internet startups had just burst onto the scene with Flipkart's 1 billion fundraise in 2014, and then India saw its first major funding boom for startups. So there was tremendous interest among publishers to explain how the startup world works to general readers, right? Because I mean, at that time, certainly very few people in India even knew what venture capital was, or what internet entrepreneurship was. At that time, I had just started covering Flipkart. I'd covered Flipkart for a year, and I pitched a book on Flipkart, but then it didn't work out for various reasons. And then finally in 2018, after Flipkart was sold to Walmart, it seemed like the perfect time to attempt a biography of Flipkart. And yeah, so that's how the book came about. So at Mint from 2014, I had been writing on Flipkart and covering Flipkart as the main company of my beat for about 4 years by the time I started working on the book in 2018. So I already, was kind of well versed with at least the broad points of the Flipkart story, and it just seemed a very, very compelling narrative. So that's how the book has come about.
That almost answers two of our questions that we prepared for you. So thanks for that. But yeah, Sauradeep, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you partially answered it, but still, I would like to know. So Flipkart happens to be the poster boy of Indian entrepreneurship, right? And again, 2014-15 was the time. I mean, when TVF pitches also came up, there was a new boom for in an interest in the startups. But Flipkart wasn't perhaps the only startup, that was present in India, major startup
Yeah.
that was present and operating in India at that point of time. What made you specifically choose Flipkart?
So that's a great question. So I think there were two or three reasons. One is simply because I've been writing on Flipkart, so there was that familiarity with the company and the people who had played key roles at in building the company. So that was the first most obvious reason. But I think um, as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, Flipkart was really the too big to fail company in that startup ecosystem, because before Flipkart, the startup ecosystem was just very, very small in size. I don't think even the VCs, or at least most of the VCs who were in the business of funding startups, even they believed that it was possible to build giant internet companies from India. So if you see the records of a lot of the venture capitalists before 2014, most of them actually had um, portfolios that had very few internet companies as such, especially consumer internet companies. There were very few of them. And that was because most of them did not believe that it was possible to build a huge internet company out of India. So Flipkart totally changed all that. Flipkart's rise showed that you can, in fact, build these massive operations heavy internet companies. Basically, like local entrepreneurs can do that. And India is not going to just be dominated by American or Chinese MNCs. So Flipkart was really that too big to fail startup, because if Flipkart had lost out to Amazon, then that would have been a catastrophic event for the startup ecosystem. So just in the sheer importance that Flipkart had for the startup ecosystem as a whole, it warranted a closer look. And third, was that basically it was just an extremely interesting story. Because its rise, especially before 2012, was so unlikely. Because it was not the first e-commerce company that was started in India. There were dozens of of e-commerce companies that came before Flipkart, that were there even when Flipkart started out, including eBay. So none of them had made it big, and that is for a variety of reasons. But then, Flipkart came onto the scene, and it was started by these two guys who were really, non-entities when they had started Flipkart, and yet, somehow they managed to build this like behemoth in no time. And the story of how they had built it was just, I mean, it was just extremely fascinating, and it hadn't been told in its entirety. Most people who became familiar with Flipkart were actually only aware of the post 2014 story of Flipkart, because that is when it became clear that this is going to be a big company. Very few people were aware of what happened before 2014, right? So just that the narrative, the story of that company was so interesting and was so compelling that I felt like it deserves to be told in full. So these are like some of the main reasons, why I picked Flipkart and why Flipkart deserves a book by itself.
No, true that, and I very much relate with it, because I was in fact telling Soradeep as well that one reason why I wanted to read the book was because, as you said, that people came across Flipkart after 2014, right?
Yeah.
And given that, so I was exposed to e-commerce itself in 2015, 2014 is when I started
Mm-hmm.
looking at Flipkart and Amazon as potential places to buy, and
Mm-hmm.
since then Flipkart had a lot of negative publicity, so I never
Yeah.
favorably viewed it. So the moment, I guess, the idea of looking at, is there something more to what I already know,
Mm-hmm.
it was that curiosity that it made me want, and trust me, I mean, the moment I read it, it broke so many myths, so many misconceptions about the organization, how it started. I guess there's a line when someone says that you are a copy of Amazon, and Sachin says that tu karke dikha, and
Yeah.
that's just like, damn, that's badass, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a quick observation here is key, and as you also rightly call, the company started in 2007, right?
Yeah.
And 2008, the financial crisis hit.
Yeah.
Now we are talking about that time when, even today, financial inclusion in India is not so widespread, right? Many people don't have bank accounts. At that time, of course, a lot of more people didn't. And then on top of that, to have debit cards and credit cards, plus a working internet connection and the desire to buy something online, right? It just seems so counterintuitive that despite all that, Flipkart was able to grow and was about to break even at that point of time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would like to know your comments on what do you think worked for Flipkart, and
Mm-hmm.
what role did it play in shaping up the Indian e-commerce world as it is today.
Mm-hmm. Before I answer that question, I'd just like to say that while Flipkart was kind of close to breaking even then, or it had broken even then, it was really on an insignificant volume of business, right? So that whether it was breaking even or not was kind of besides the point. In the context of the way we view internet companies now, at that time, of course, because funding was so unlikely and was so uh, meager, that of course breaking even mattered. But right, like if anyone was to consider that kind of break even right now, or in today's context, it would just be meaningless. So yeah, so I just wanted to kind of clarify that. What kind of differentiated Flipkart, or some of the things that Flipkart did differently? There were many things, but first, the fundamental thing that separated Flipkart from um, everyone else was that they understood that um, till then, which is 2007, 8, 9, 10, whenever the early years of Flipkart, a lot of a lot of e-commerce companies had tried the business, right? They were in business, and yet they were failing. So why were they failing? They understood that, and they understood that if they have to be a meaningful force, if they have to build a substantial business, then they will have to address the barriers. They'll have to kind of remove the barriers that were stopping the expansion of e-commerce, and not just Flipkart, because there was no e-commerce business at all to for them to kind of use the existing infrastructure, or that, right? So they understood that we have to build everything. We have to build everything from scratch. And how do we build everything from scratch? um like, you basically just require tremendous amounts of capital, right? So that evolved over time, in terms of how they saw say growth, how they saw capital requirements, etc. But the fundamental thing that they understood, which other companies did not, is that if they don't remove the barriers that are hindering the expansion of e-commerce, then they are going to face the same fate that all the other e-commerce companies had faced, right? So all the other e-commerce companies saw that, like whatever you said, like very limited internet connectivity, low trust among users, uh, few debit cards, this and that. I mean, there's a laundry list of problems. So every e-commerce company saw this list, and there were just so many things on that list that just seemed um beyond them, or beyond anyone for that matter, that they just said, screw it, like we are just going to try and build like a small e-commerce business, and then we'll see how it goes. But Flipkart said no. If we have to actually build a substantial business, we'll have to address these fundamental problems. So that was, like, I would say, the first and the most basic thing that they understood and addressed, that no one else did. And everything else, whether you talk about their customer obsession, whether you talk about the very strong backing that they had from their investors, the great team that they built, um, and a lot of other fantastic things that they did, everything flows from this fundamental thing that they had to address all the problems that were hindering the expansion of e-commerce.
Right. So, Mihir, while you have been following the Flipkart story for so many years, and this was a story that was building upon itself, I mean, if not every week, every month, right? Perhaps there would have been an aha moment for you that, okay, so no more waiting, enough of the story, I'll go ahead and publish it. What was that particular event within Flipkart that triggered, okay, so now it's time to publish?
So I think the main event was basically the sale to Walmart, because that brought to an end the Flipkart story as such, or at least a story of Flipkart as an independent company. So once there was that finality, it it made it easier to narrate that story, because the problem with doing a book on Flipkart or attempting a narrative on Flipkart before that was that you were just not sure how this is going to end up. Because at least till in that period from late 2015 to early 2017, that those 18 months, it just, no one knew what is going to happen to Flipkart. I mean, there was a very realistic possibility that, like, Flipkart was just going to collapse. I mean, maybe not to the extent that Snapdeal ended up collapsing, but would certainly have become a much, much smaller company. So if you were attempting a book then, how do you really kind of, like, what narrative do you present? That was a very tricky question. But then after the sale to Walmart, I mean, that was the end. So you could then, make sense of the Flipkart story in its entirety, like, reasonably well.
And now, since this Flipkart story is a real story and it's not a fiction, the characters in it are also very real, right? And like any real characters, they're not white or black, they're gray,
Yeah.
shades of gray maybe. Uh, did any of these, these characters, did you develop judgment for any of these characters, and did they influence your narrative while writing?
So definitely, that I wouldn't say it's a temptation, but it's actually inevitable, because when you get so immersed in a topic, you will end up having your own biases, your own kind of judgment and stuff like that. But this is one thing that I made a conscious decision to address, which was basically that I would not judge these people with the benefit of hindsight. Whatever judgments that I was making, I would make them uh, placing them in the context that they were in at the particular time. So for instance, if I'm describing events of 2011, I would not look at 2011 with the point of view of someone from 2018, because that just, that's unfair. And I mean, even more importantly, it would just totally distort the narrative. So my attempt was to basically place these people in their time. So if I'm describing an event from 2008, I was going to look at them in the world of 2008, not in the world of 2012, not in the world of 2009, not in the world of 2018. So whatever judgments that I've made, this is basically the kind of um, um, the world in which I've made those judgments. As far as personal biases, obviously there will be judgment calls that you make, but again, you kind of you know have like very specific criteria by which you um, make these calls. But I mean, for most people uh, who've read the book and who've given me their views on the book, they've, especially the ones who were involved in the Flipkart story, they've said that one thing that they liked about the book was that they did not feel that it was biased against or in favor of a particular person beyond a reasonable degree. So I would say that certainly there were some judgments and some kind of you know um uh, what do you say, like some things that I have given my opinions on, but they were like pretty like informed opinions rather than just like moralistic, just like only moralistic judgments.
So, two follow-ups. Uh, first is based on the point when you said that when the Walmart acquisition happened, right? You thought, okay, fine, this is the end, and now you can build a narrative, right? And I guess I actually wanted to ask this question a lot later in the entire interview, but uh, do you think that there's still going to be enough enough spice or masala in the Flipkart story going forward that you can write something more, like maybe 5-10 years later, or are you going to work on something entirely different?
So
Basically,
I
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
what's a new project? What's your next project then?
Sure. So I don't think there is any point to doing another Flipkart book because like whatever has happened since 2018, um, by itself it doesn't merit um, a separate book, simply because the importance of Flipkart is no longer what it was, um, say in 2017 or 18, right? Because it has now kind of done uh, its job in terms of giving exits to many of its investors. Now even preparing for an IPO, etc., etc. So it is no longer the too big to fail startup, right? And it has played a huge role in putting India on the global startup map. Now, it is just one of the many large internet companies that India has, the largest even now, but it's just one of many large internet companies that India has. So no, so I don't think it really merits a book by itself now. In terms of my next project, I have no idea because I'm still figuring out what I want to do next. Whether I want to do a book on startups or something else, I have no idea. I guess I'll just decide in the next year or two.
But do you want to like keep continue writing because when Sauradip and I were discussing, we realized that just the kind of insight that you would have gotten into the Indian startup ecosystem, and also to analyze the entire journey of the world's, or sorry, India's biggest startup, right? It definitely makes you at least, I mean, I would go out and say that it does make you an expert at understanding how a startup should be run, what goes right, what's going wrong, right, and what's the entire journey of taking it from initiation to something sustainable and big, right? Have you considered becoming a consultant for startup companies? Have you been asked yet, or on a lighter note?
No, 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 not. I mean, not really, because I think while the like while when you're immersed in such a thing as the Flipkart story, you end up kind of learning a lot, like you said, about how does a startup go from 0 to 10? But honestly, that is just accidental, in the sense that I'm not really looking for that. What I'm looking for is basically the story of the people who are running the company. How do they think? What drives them? How do they work with each other? Stuff like that. So everything else that you learn about the startup and how to build a startup as such, that is just accidental. So yeah. So no.
Okay, okay, no, great. Actually, really, really looking forward to your next book already, because
Thank you.
I guess again, to at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I really enjoyed the entire narrative. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. Very inspiring and beautifully written.
Thank you.
And that sort of brings me to the next question. Now the book is pretty sensitive,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't really have like a happily ever after either.
Yeah.
It ends on a very sort of a dull note, so to say, for
Yeah.
many characters. Um, and then I read your author's notes, so I know that Flipkart or the founders didn't formally agree to an interview for the purpose of this
Yeah.
book. But because it was in a way about the founders, did you get like a sign off from them before publishing it? And
Oh
after
no, no, no.
no,
No.
so you
They
just
were
you just
not. Yeah, they were not involved at all in the book, because I mean, look, even when I started working on the book in I think, yeah, it was August of 2018. Um, I was pretty sure that they would not agree to kind of talk at that time, because I mean they'd had spectacularly controversial exits from
yeah.
Flipkart. I mean, Sachin's came first, and then Vinny's came about 6-7 months later. But even though so at that time Vinny was still with Flipkart, he was still the group CEO. But obviously, there would have. I mean, there were non-disclosure agreements that Walmart would have had with him, and generally the Flipkart story, especially um, 2016 onward, was just very volatile and very controversial. So I had I had almost no expectation that they would participate. So in fact, even when we pitched the book to publishers, right? My agent and I were very like upfront about it. That look, this is going to be um, done without them, most likely, because it's very unlikely that they will agree to talk at this point. So no, so there was no kind of sign off or any participation from either of them for the book. Of
and
course, I
and
had met them before. I had interviewed them and met them several times between 2013, actually, between 2013 and 2017. So it was not like they were strangers, or that they did not know that this book was happening. They knew the book was happening, obviously, but they did not participate in it at all.
but then after publishing, did you get any calls, any threats ki ye kya kar diya? Hatao isko.
No, no, not really. I mean, of course, you mean from the founders, right?
From anyone in Flipkart, because there are a lot of characters there.
So, I mean, obviously, I heard back from a lot of people, right, who are in the book. And some people were not very happy, obviously. But I wouldn't say that, I mean, at least to my knowledge, I don't know of any person who is, say, like hopping mad or anything about the book or their portrayal in the book. So, no, the business book.
Okay, and I guess circling back to the entire point of again the Walmart acquisition, right? What is your take on how this is going to pan out for Flipkart, and then this competition, the duopoly that we have with Amazon and Flipkart, right? How do you think that that's going to turn out now for the company?
So it's very difficult to answer the second part of the question, because the thing is, it has been a duopoly for a long time, but now with the entry of Geo, we don't know what's going to happen. I would say that if it was just left to competition, like free competition, then Geo is very unlikely to challenge this duopoly, because I mean they've just built such you know deep expertise in e-commerce that I mean, and the capital that they have, like these two things combined, I mean, it's just very difficult to see how anyone else will challenge them, at least uh, in mainstream e-commerce. Now, if someone else comes up with new channels in e-commerce, or a completely new way of doing e-commerce, then there is still a small possibility that the duopoly of these two companies can be broken. But if you're talking of mainstream e-commerce, I mean, very unlikely that anyone, forget Geo, like anyone else in the world can, challenge Flipkart and Amazon in India. Um, as far as how the Walmart acquisition is likely to pan out, it looks like they are on track to do a huge IPO, which honestly has taken me by surprise, and I think it has taken even the insiders at Flipkart by surprise, because it has very little to do with Flipkart or with Walmart. Basically, just the market for internet companies, or just the investor attitude towards internet companies has just uh, turned so positive in such a surprising way, right? Because if you remember at the start of COVID last March, everyone was talking about how this is basically, like, yeah, like internet companies are going to have a terrible time over the next 18 months or 2 years. There'll be lots of closures. Even bigger companies will see down rounds, valuation cuts, etc., etc. But instead of that, what we have seen is just, a hyper funding kind of wave, and just this um, very sharp rise in the valuations of these large internet companies in the US and China. So the broader environment right now is so encouraging and positive for these big unicorns, that it is very likely that Flipkart could go public in the next year to 18 months at a pretty high valuation, which was, to be honest, I mean, very tough to imagine even like a year ago. I mean, they would have at some point have been able to do an IPO with the valuations that we are talking about right now, which is, if you just see the reports, anywhere from 35 billion to even 50 billion. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, there is like Walmart did not expect this at all. I mean, they would have been happy with so the Flipkart so the Flipkart deal happened at a valuation of 21 billion. They would have been happy with, say a 20-25% jump in valuation at the time of the IPO. They would have been thrilled with it, in fact. But now the valuations that we are talking, I mean, like, yeah, there is no way that anyone expected this.
So here, my next question to you is, if you were to don your hat of an observer of startup ecosystem, what do you foresee is the next big thing here in this ecosystem?
Um, so right now, I mean, if you would asked this question before COVID, there would have been a totally different answer. But at this point, I mean, I would say Byju's. In fact, anyone would say Byju's, because education technology has just picked up in an unbelievable way. So, and Byju's is leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else at this point. So yeah, I would say Byju's. But
Okay.
sorry, yeah.
No, please, please.
I was just going to add that it still remains to be seen, how edtech companies will fare once the pandemic ends, because this is obviously going to end at some point. And with vaccinations picking up, it is not unlikely that I mean, some kind of normalcy will resume by August, September or so. So we'll really have to see, uh, how many of the new users that these edtech companies ended up adding in the last 12 to 15 months will continue to use these platforms once the pandemic ends? So that is a question that can only be answered after the pandemic ends. But as of now, I mean, definitely Byju's looks like the next big thing.
And while talking with you, what I another question that came to my mind was that you started covering Flipkart from 2014, and of course there was a lot of media uproar on what's going on, right? Do you think media had a role to play in the way Flipkart turned out to be?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
how did it influence Flipkart in specific, and how does it influence the startup ecosystem in general?
So I mean, if you remember, even in the book, I've talked about this episode where this event where the Forbes story kind of had this very very negative impact on Flipkart way back in 2012. So definitely, media coverage of Flipkart has played a very very crucial role in shaping the perception of the company and of the startup ecosystem. Because like in any new thing, especially new thing, but I mean generally with anything that you think of, like how do investors, how do say regular people, or how does anyone understand something, or and especially something new? It is basically through mainstream media, because back then, say in the years especially from 2008 to 2013, social media wasn't really mainstream as such. At least wasn't mainstream till 2010, 11 or so. So obviously, most people were still getting their news from mainstream media, and so the mainstream media has played a very important role in shaping the understanding of companies like Flipkart in the minds of not only the general public but even of investors. Because I mean, you'd be surprised at how much sentiment plays a role in investment decisions. I mean, at least I was surprised while I was
And
researching
has
on
it
the
been
book.
a force for the good or for the worse for these companies?
Oh, I mean, definitely like force for the good. There is no doubt about it, because the sheer amount of coverage that has been devoted to Flipkart. I mean, it's like, yeah, like there is no doubt about it. Although if you speak to the people at Flipkart, they'll have a very different view about this. But as an outsider, you cannot but just look at just the sheer newsprint that has been devoted to the Flipkart story, and not just the Flipkart story, but even the even other startups. But Flipkart has definitely been the most covered startup in India, and one of the most covered companies in India, not just in the startup world. So it is. I mean, it has benefited Flipkart tremendously. I would say, and I mean, obviously, that is not. So talking as a journalist, obviously, that you don't really think about, whether say this is something that is good or bad, right? Like you think in terms of what is news and what is interesting. So you end up writing about that. But the way the impact that this has is that it obviously um, indicates to the general reader that this company is super important, right? Because if you're reading about a company in on the front page of a Mint or a Economic Times every day or every other day, I mean that creates a huge impact. So yeah, so I would say that you know no doubt at all that all these companies have benefited big time from media coverage.
May the force be with you. That's great.
So many of our viewers might not know that this particular book is soon going to be coming as a web series.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I mean, when is it coming, and do you have any idea who is going to be cast as which role?
No, no, not yet. I mean, so last year, just before the pandemic started, I think, I mean, what I was hearing from people who have kind of bought the rights of the book was that they were very close to agreeing to the production folks and the cast and stuff like that, right? But the pandemic just like totally screwed that up. Then again, after the situation stabilized, I think they've resumed talks. So I think we should know, I think, by August or September as to who's making this and when it will be released, and who's the cast, etc., etc. And yeah, I'm hoping that before 2023 it'll be out. But I mean that is obviously completely up to the production folks and the speed at which this proceeds.
But how did you feel when you were approached for this web series, and will you have an active role in the creation of this?
Um, I so the second, like in terms of like whether I'll have a role or not, I don't know yet. Because there is, I mean, I could kind of say consult with the script and stuff like that, but again, that is entirely up to the producer and the director, because the production house that has purchased the visual rights has purchased it in full, right? So it's entirely up to them. As far as my reaction or like how I felt when I was approached about this, I mean, honestly, I had no idea, because when I started working on the book, I mean, there was no uh, like there was no talk or there was no discussion at all between my agent and I about say if there'll be interest in making this into a web series or a movie. Although a couple of guys at Flipkart had told me that you should definitely kind of make sure that this comes out on screen because it's such a dramatic story. But obviously, I thought that was all, and I mean they kind of just said it in jest. But my agent actually pitched the book to this producer whom he knew, and immediately they said that they were interested. So it honestly just came totally out of the blue, because the the production rights were actually sold even before the book was released. So I mean, like I had zero familiarity with this world, with the kind of the Bollywood world. So I had no idea how these things worked. So even if I had wanted to kind of sell the book, there is no way I would have expected that this would happen so early. And even my agent was really really surprised that the first person that we approached just kind of bought it. Yeah, so it was like total surprise.
And viewers, since Mihir has already confirmed that there's no part two of this book coming, so perhaps they can only look forward to one season of the of the web series. So, Sahil, would you like to ask the last question as we are nearing the end of this interview?
Okay, so this is sort of the end where we concluded by asking what the author reads, and you did mention that you read on a lot of variety of topics, politics, history, and everything. Which is your favorite book, which you think is a must for everyone? Something that changed you, influenced you deeply.
Um, in any particular sphere, or
Anything. I mean, fiction to non-fiction, anything really.
I mean, so there are several books that that have like exercised a lot of influence over me, but one accessible book that I would strongly recommend to people is it's a very popular book, but it's still a fantastic read, which is this book by the writer Pankaj Mishra, which is called Butter Chicken in Ludhiana. So that book was written in the 90s. It was a look at how small town India is kind of changing with liberalization, and it's just a fantastic read even today. So I would strongly recommend that book. And in terms of say like just a book about India as such, I think Ram Guha's book, India After Gandhi. That's a superb history of India. And a business book that I would strongly recommend is Ambani and Sons, which is this biography of Dhirubhai Ambani by this former foreign correspondent called Hamish MacDonald. Um, it's a must read if you are at all interested in the history of say post independence, um, uh, uh, like business and post independence India, and how business, especially like big business, interacted with government, and the whole government business nexus. I mean, it's a fantastic read.
Got that. Perhaps we got a lineup of the next authors to interview there. But thank you so much for that, Mihir. And again, I guess on an ending note, really grateful that you came for this interview. I guess personally, going beyond the book, it is just very exciting for Souradip and I to know the author, to know the brain behind what went into writing there. Right, I cannot fathom bringing out any story. With such comprehensive narrative that despite many things happening at the same time, one understands what was going on, right? It was absolutely wonderful. I was really excited, and I mean, too probably preposterous of me to say, but not disappointed with this conversation. Just enjoyed the entire talk.
Same
So,
here. No, thanks. That's very kind of you. I really enjoyed this talk as well.
and then, I mean, I was really wishing that you would be working on second book so that we can quickly get it and have you again for another round of interview.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, for sure. Whenever that happens.
yeah, please do. And thank you so much everyone for watching. I know that COVID's really hard on us especially, and wish you all the good health, speedy recovery. If anyone around you or you yourself are not feeling well, um, all our best wishes from the Banyan Tree team and from Mihir as well to all of you. It's been great. It's been great 1 hour. Thank you so much, everyone, again.
And before you close, Sahil, so viewers, if you have not read this book yet, you know what's the first thing to do. The description. In our description, you'll find the link to the book. Go to Flipkart or go to Amazon and buy this Flipkart story. You will. I mean, if you're a slow reader, you would enjoy your month. If you're a fast reader like Sahil, your weekend is sorted.
So yeah,
So
I actually I forgot to call. I was thinking in my mind that I'd call it out. This book is a page turner because I was reading it like till 3:30 in the night or in the morning. Right, I'd start at 12 and read it till 3:30, and I read it at my own pace. It took me like about a week to finish though. And damn, I mean, I'd wake up with my eyes burning, but damn, I wouldn't skip it, right? So again, I mean, great read.
yeah. So thank you so much, viewers. Thanks a lot for watching this episode.